In the middle of the bustling mall, Scott's voice rang out, harsh and unfeeling. "Look at how adorable our child is. Takes after me, doesn't he? And we've got another one on the way. Just look at my wife. You can clearly see she's expecting. But you must be tough being barren and useless. Dumping someone like you was the best decision I ever made." His cruel words, defective, barren, useless, were meant to sting as he flaunted his new, fertile wife with an air of superiority. Despite the sympathetic looks from those around us, I couldn't care less about their pity at that moment. With calm resolve, I decided it was time to reveal a truth he didn't know. "Don't you know? My name is Alyssa. I'm a 34-year-old housewife. Scott, my ex-husband, is 36, 2 years older than me. We met at a social gathering through mutual friends. Scott was the life of the party, the complete opposite of me. At that gathering, I was the shy one, often lingering on the sidelines with awkward conversations. But Scott, with his outgoing nature, made sure I was included. He'd casually say, 'You should have more confidence in yourself, Alyssa. You're so cute,' as we walked home from drinking parties. His upbeat demeanor and genuine encouragement began to warm me up to him. I couldn't help but develop a soft spot for Scott. His straightforwardness was endearing in its own way. As we spent more time together, our connection deepened. We started seeing each other regularly, eventually moving in together and getting married. Our life together was harmonious, buoyed by the affection and support of my kind husband. Despite being a close couple, we struggled to have children. We both wanted a child, so we decided to pursue fertility treatment, though it was really I who took the initiative. Scott was incredibly supportive throughout the process. "It's okay. I'm here," he'd reassure me. "Even if we can't have children, I'll always be by your side, Alyssa." "I'm so sorry, Scott. I'm really sorry," I'd say, overwhelmed with guilt. "It's not your fault," he'd reply gently. "You don't have to carry this burden alone. Let's take our time." As the months turned into years, my feelings of guilt only deepened. 3 years into the fertility treatments, there was still no sign of a child. Initially, Scott remained patient and kind, but gradually, his frustration began to show. One evening, when I attempted to discuss my cycle and suggested we try to conceive, he simply said, "I'm tired," and turned his back to me, falling asleep. Since then, Scott had been making excuses to avoid intimacy, and we hadn't even tried seriously to determine if we could conceive. Our relationship was facing a crisis before we even had a chance to start a family. Our conversations as a couple had dwindled, but Scott suddenly brought up a topic with an unusually cheerful tone. "I saw a colleague's child the other day for the first time in a while, and he was absolutely adorable." Whether he was aware of my feelings or not, Scott continued to talk about his colleague's child. "Oh, really? I wonder when I'll get to see my own child," I responded, trying to keep my voice steady. Scott's response was tinged with sarcasm, and he began to blame me as if he were a judgmental mother-in-law. "Yeah, but with how things have been lately, I doubt you have a better chance of conceiving." Feeling guilty, I hesitantly tried to address the issue with Scott, but he quickly shot back, "What? I'm just exhausted from work. If it were another woman, this would be resolved without any hassle. Honestly, don't you think you failed as a woman if you can't have children? Try putting yourself in my shoes." I could only stay silent. Each word felt like a dagger to my heart, and I became increasingly afraid to even talk to him. A week later, after finishing my usual examination and treatment at the hospital, I went home determined that this would be my final attempt. When Scott came home, I gathered the courage to speak with him. "Can we talk for a moment?" I asked. "What's up?" he replied, sounding indifferent. "The doctor suggested it might be helpful for you to get checked as well. Would you be willing to go together?" "What? You think there's something wrong with me? That's impossible." "But I heard it's uncommon for husbands not to get tested. Can you please do it?" I asked, summoning all my courage. Even as I pleaded again, Scott's response was harsh. "Are you serious? I've put up with you, someone who lacks charm, and now you want more cooperation from me, trying to blame me for your inability to have children. You're the worst. I just want a child of my own, one that doesn't have to be with you. Do you understand?" His words cut deep, as if saying that my inability to conceive made me a failure as a wife. I was stunned into silence by the shock. All the housework and fertility treatments had been for us, my sacrifices for our existing family and our hopes for the future. But when he criticized me for lacking charm, it was the last straw. My patience, which I had barely managed to hold on to, finally broke. A few days later, Scott casually dropped a bombshell. The other woman is pregnant. Honestly, nothing's happening with us, so I'm going to be with her. It turned out his mistress was a college student and she was expecting his child. It seemed any man would prefer a partner who could give him a child without hesitation, even if it meant belittling me. Though it was infuriating, reflecting on his words, it felt like he had been subtly declaring his affair all along. With a mix of resignation and clarity, I signed the divorce papers Scott had left on the table and submitted them to City Hall. The day after the divorce was finalized, I could have sought damages for Scott's infidelity, but I was still troubled by the childless aspect of our marriage. After consulting with a lawyer, I decided to forego claiming damages in exchange for Scott agreeing to undergo a fertility test. It was my way of getting some measure of retribution. A few days later, I shared my decision with my parents at home. Instead of feeling upset, I was more consumed by anger and regret for not ending things with Scott sooner. My time with him felt like a waste, and my friends encouraged me to embrace a fresh start. 2 years after the divorce, I ran into Scott while shopping at a mall. He was with his new wife, a former college student, and their child. Given that we lived in the countryside, it wasn't surprising to run into each other in a place like this. "Oh, it's been a while. How are you?" Scott said, attempting a casual tone. "Hi," I responded, feeling a mix of emotions. Scott greeted me with a smirk and a condescending attitude, clearly reveling in his new life while flaunting his success. "Look at our kid. So adorable, right? He takes after me, and we're expecting another one too. Just look at my wife. It's obvious she's pregnant. But you. Must be tough being barren and useless. Ending things with someone like you was the best decision I ever made." His words, loud and demeaning, rang through the mall. He took pleasure in boasting about his fertile new wife while insulting me as defective, childless, and a failure. Though people around us cast sympathetic glances, I barely noticed. With a deep breath, I decided to deliver a dose of revenge to my ex-husband. "Well, it's great to see you've found happiness with your new wife and child. But tell me, Scott, how does that reflect on you?" "What? What are you talking about?" Scott asked, clearly confused. "Don't you remember? You agreed to undergo a fertility test instead of pursuing damages. The results are in, and it turns out you were the one who needed fertility treatment, not me. I'm perfectly fine and fertile." "No way. This has to be a joke," Scott stammered, his confidence shaken. "It's the truth," I said calmly, leaning in to whisper in his ear. "If you think it's a lie, why not get a DNA test done on your child? Best of luck with your new family." Panicking, Scott abruptly left me and confronted his wife. From a distance, I heard him shouting accusations like, "You deceived me." Not wanting to escalate the situation further, I gave a brief wave and walked away. After the divorce, my heart had felt heavy and clouded, but the truth brought an immediate sense of clarity. I later learned that the children his wife had given birth to, as well as the one she was expecting, were not Scott's. She had a main partner, the true father of the children, but had married Scott for financial security rather than love. Once it was revealed that the children weren't his, Scott's anger grew, and their marriage quickly deteriorated. His wife, who had never truly loved him, easily returned to the real father of her children. Scott, discarded and left alone, began calling me almost daily, professing his love and begging for reconciliation. He claimed, "I was just captivated by a younger woman, but now I'm clear-headed. You're the only one I truly love." The fact that he had abandoned me when I needed him most was a painful reality I couldn't ignore. His words couldn't erase the past or change my resolve. I was stunned and promptly blocked his number, determined not to revisit the hurtful past. At the time of the mall incident, I was happily remarried and enjoying a smooth sailing life with my new husband and our first child. I had known him from before our marriage. He was a representative from a client company I worked with in my previous job. We had first met in person at a dinner party, but since we had talked frequently over the phone for work, it felt less like a first meeting. Although we had kept in touch, we gradually lost contact after I left my job. Years later, I unexpectedly ran into him in town. He confessed that he had harbored feelings for me when he learned I was getting married but never expressed them. As we started seeing each other again, I found myself drawn to him. Our connection quickly deepened, leading us to marriage. He embraced me completely, even acknowledging the difficulties of my previous marriage. He reassured me with, "You can tell me everything, it's okay." Before we were married, he accompanied me to the hospital for a fertility test, an act that filled me with an unprecedented sense of love and support. I felt truly blessed to have welcomed my first child with a husband who cares deeply for me. A few years later, Scott, who had lost touch and couldn't let go, began showing up around my neighborhood. One day, as I was about to take our child, who had just begun walking, to the park, I spotted Scott. No way, I thought, seeing his shocked reaction to our child. Scott seemed unable to accept the truth of his infertility and was still under the mistaken belief that I was the one who was infertile. From that day on, whenever he saw us, he began insisting that we weren't actually infertile and that the child must have been conceived before our divorce. Of course, that wasn't true. Given the child's age, it was clear that he was the child I had with my new husband. I had been ignoring Scott since we had no direct contact, but his persistent confrontations left me unsure of how to handle the situation. My husband took charge and said firmly, "This child is ours, genuinely. I had a DNA test done because you kept stalking us. Here's the proof. Please stay away from our home." He handed the results to Scott, effectively driving him away. I felt a pang of guilt for causing trouble for my family, as Scott had no place in our current lives. But after sending Scott away, my husband silently held my hand and our child's hand. Though no words were spoken, his support was more than enough. Once our child started attending daycare, Scott, unable to get near our house, began loitering around the daycare when my husband wasn't there. I stayed vigilant, and with the support of the Parents Association and daycare staff, we managed to keep things under control for a while. However, when Scott eventually forced his way into the daycare, we immediately reported him. His presence posed a threat to the children, and the police took him into custody. Despite being restrained by the officers, Scott continued to shout his baseless claim, "That's my child. What's wrong with visiting my own child? Let me go," creating a scene and causing confusion. Unfortunately, Scott's boss had a child attending the same daycare as mine, so the incident quickly became known. As a result, Scott was ostracized at work. He was given no tasks and spent his days idle. Despite this, he desperately tried to cling to his job, making increasingly unseemly excuses and shouting, "There's no way I'm infertile. I do have my own child." Ultimately, his outbursts led to his dismissal, as was to be expected. Left without a job and no family to turn to, Scott returned to his parents' house, living a quiet and subdued life. However, rumors soon began to circulate among the neighbors about the man who had been involved in a police incident and had no children. He became the subject of scorn and was widely looked down upon. Without a job and unable to have children, finding a new partner was likely to be a challenge for Scott. The stigma of being childless hit him hard, leaving a deep wound. His parents, possibly concerned about the neighborhood's gossip, seemed to confine him at home, cutting off any remaining chance he had of starting a family. For us, the knowledge that Scott was essentially sidelined brought a sense of relief. We continued to live happily, surrounded by the love of my husband and our child. Children often strengthen family bonds, and I firmly believe that no matter what challenges we face, our child will always keep us connected.